Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest episode of Top 5. This is the show where I give a top 5 list off the top of my head. The topics are generated by my wife. They all relate to progressive rock in some fashion because that's my passion and what I love. So if you guys are interested in top 5 lists and want to join this channel, I would really appreciate you guys as subscribers. It would really help the channel. I try to do these about once a week. You know, sometimes I'll skip a week here and there, but usually they're pretty regular and they have a lot of fun comments and people really chiming in and contributing. So today's topic is a pretty easy topic to come up with a list. If you're a prog fan, I think this is kind of a layup of a topic, but it's fun to get into, so we'll get into it. Top 5 prog albums of the 1970s. I did a top 5 prog albums of the 80s, which got a pretty good response, and a lot of people had some great suggestions in the comments. But let's talk about the 70s, which was really the heyday of classic progressive rock. So there's countless albums to choose from in this category, and I've already talked a lot about a lot of these albums, and so if you've watched the channel for a long period of time, you could probably predict where I'm going to go with this. But I'm going to document it anyways because I haven't done a top 5 of this yet. So first off, some honorable mentions, some things I left off my list. Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Trilogy. I love Trilogy. I think it's one of their greatest works that really showcases all of their talents as a group, so that's always been a favorite from them. Kansas's Left Overture. Some people question if Kansas is a prog band or more classic rock, perhaps, but I think they're prog through and through, and I think Left Overture is their boldest and biggest statement, and I really love it and think it's just one of the shining examples of prog and one of the few American prog examples of the 70s, so I always champion that a little bit. Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. I think it's a fantastic album. It's bookended by Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which is one of my favorite epics from the group, and then you've got some really cool shorter tracks in the middle. Just a perfect album that's really well structured. Can't complain too hard about that one. King Crimson's Red, I thought of is a really fantastic album by the group. A little bit of a harder edge to it, but it's ended with one of the biggest epics that I love. Starless is an incredible closer, and I wish I could react to some King Crimson on the channel with my wife, but unfortunately I've heard that those videos would be blocked, so we don't really get into King Crimson, but really a cool group with a lot of interesting albums throughout the 70s that I could have gone with, but like that one a lot. And Camel's Mirage. You know, Camel is a great symphonic prog band that maybe is a little bit underrated perhaps, but I think really can stick with a lot of the big classic prog bands and has an incredible album with Mirage that's their beautiful, more pastoral style prog with a lot of symphonic touchstones. So really, those are the honorable mentions. And also, I'll give a little bit of a disclaimer that I'm trying to stick to one album per artist is my typical go-to. That's how I arrange these lists, just to give more of a spread and to give more bands some voice here. So you may question, oh, well, why isn't this album there? Well, it's probably because I chose this album by this band instead of that one. So, and a lot of times I could have chosen either way, but I went the way I did this time around. Like I said, it's more off the cuff, off the top of my head. So at number 5, I'm picking Rush and their album A Farewell to Kings, which I think is really the pinnacle of their 70s output. It's a beautiful album that really showcases their progressive rock spirit. I love Xanadu. It's a really cool epic track, and of course it ends with Cygnus X1. But even the shorter tracks are really well crafted and constructed. I just think it's really the greatest statement to their more prog leanings at this time period. Of course, they continue forward and go into different types of directions as they go into the 80s and 90s and forward. But this was really their classic period where they were able to stretch their legs as a trio and do a lot of interesting instrumentation and experiment with some longer pieces and really provide an incredible soundscape for some of their great work here. At number 4, I've got Jethro Tull and the album Thick as a Brick. This is, of course, a classic. Jethro Tull are one of my favorite bands. I think they have a great blend of the folk kind of style, but have a blues background and bring in a prog element. This album, Thick as a Brick, was really almost meant as a bit of a send-off, a bit of criticism of concept albums and progressive rock and the overblown nature of it at the time, but it ended up becoming its own progressive rock classic, which I think is an incredible story for a progressive rock album. It's just well constructed. It is basically just one track the whole time, split into sides for the purposes of vinyl at the time. But it just continues forward in so many different cool directions. You get great Ian Anderson flute work. You get some incredible guitar playing, both acoustic and electric. And there's just so much fun moments, so many twists and turns. And it just keeps going. It's relentless in its pace, but it's beautiful at times. It's rocking at other times. And it just has everything I love about progressive rock in a pretty compact package. So I think that should be on any top 5 list in my mind. Number 3, I've got Gentle Giant's The Power and the Glory. I love Gentle Giant. They're one of my top 3 favorite prog bands. I really love their work, and I think their output through the 70s was just stellar, and they really don't have a bad album to their name. But Power and the Glory to me is the peak of their powers in a lot of ways. Really, any of the albums around this time period could have been mentioned here. Anything from Three Friends all the way up till Interview are all incredible albums. But I've always liked The Power and the Glory because it's a bit of a concept album, so it really has a good flow to it. It showcases basically the rise and fall of some kind of a leader. And it's really epic in its style. I love the opening of Proclamation. It's always been one of my favorite Gentle Giant tracks. To me, it's one of the first things I think of when I think of Gentle Giant, just the cool instrumental build-up where they're building up like one instrument at a time until we get back into the groove. It just has such a cool groove and feel to it. So Sincere is just so interesting and intricate and unique in its style. And just every track has something really clever and interesting in it. I love Cogs and Cogs, No God's a Man. Just every track is beautiful and complex and interesting. They're really able to blend this like complexity, but make it really palatable as a listener. Make it have good melodies and be really catchy and have groove for days. So it's really cool what they're able to pull off. And I just love all of their records, so that had to be on the list. At number 2, I've got Genesis and their album The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. This was a hard one to pick because I really love all the Genesis albums of this era. Everything from Nursery Crime all the way up to Wind and Wuthering are all in contention for this spot. Conventional wisdom might say I should have picked Selling England by the Pound, which is probably the more widely accepted Genesis album for a prog fan. The Lamb gets a little bit of criticism, and some people view it as a little bit less than some of their other material because it's so bloated and has material that maybe isn't as exciting throughout the runtime, could be trimmed a bit. The story's a bit wacky and all over the place. Maybe it doesn't have the most epic ending in the world, but I just really love it for what it is, warts and all. It's one of those albums that's just a classic almost because it's not perfect in some way. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think it's endearing that it has such a quirk about it and has so many different twists and turns. The story is so strange, but it's something you can endlessly think about and theorize. There's so many great musical moments. There's great tracks that are catchy and fun, but also tracks that are really complicated and complex and ever-changing and interesting. It's just a really interesting ride of an album, and it's one my dad always speaks so highly of, so I have such strong feelings for it because of the connection it has with my dad, and it's one of his favorite records. So, and it's to me, it's like the prototypical prog concept album, that would become very widely taken in the later eras of prog. There's a lot of newer prog concept albums, and I think a lot of them take their root in The Lamb and what was accomplished here, this more continuous storytelling nature of the album that I don't think was super common back in those times. So really groundbreaking album, really fun and quirky, and has a lot of different interesting parts and bits to it, and just has so many beautiful sections that I just will always love and will always stand out to me. But number 1, of course, I have to go with Yes at number 1, and I think this is probably the easiest one to predict and guess. It's Yes's Close to the Edge. I think if there ever was a perfect prog album, I think this is the example to point to of what perfect prog looks like. Just front to back, it's perfection. The epic Close to the Edge is just really well constructed. It starts off with a bit of chaos, but then it really settles into a groove, has a rockier type section and vibe, but then it really settles back into this more ethereal feel with this epic church organ. It's just really grandiose and majestic in a way that I don't know if any other band can pull off. But then you get And You and I, which is a beautiful, almost ballad, but extended and really takes its time and has these beautiful moments, this great acoustic guitar and this really beautiful singing performance from John Anderson. And then we end with the rockier Siberian Khatru, which is just a blast to listen to, allows the band to have a lot of fun, is a great live track, and just showcases another facet of who they are. So it really showcases all the true sides of Yes and what they can accomplish, the more epic side, the more beautiful, majestic types feel, and the more rockier, fun vibe of the band as well. So it encapsulates everything the band's all about, in my opinion, in a pretty short, compact package. I really love Tales from Topographic Oceans, which I know is somewhat controversial. A lot of people don't really prefer that album, but I really love it, and I think it's great, and it's probably the one my dad would mention as his favorite Yes album. But I feel like this is a bit more compact and a bit more perfect in its execution, whereas there's probably bits from Tales you could remove and take out and say are a little bit more of a filler type material. Even though I like it, different people may not be as into it at all times, but Close to the Edge is just a perfect example. And if someone came up to me and said, okay, tell me in 40 minutes what prog is all about, I think playing this album for them is pretty much the best you can do to explain what prog rock's all about. So those are my top prog albums from the 70s. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments your favorite prog albums from the 70s. I'm sure you probably share some of mine. You probably have a lot of others that I didn't mention, and a lot of preferences for different albums by the same bands, I'm sure. But I'd love to know all that stuff in the comments. So that's always the best part of these top 5 videos, is seeing everyone's comments and getting some new ideas and suggestions of 70s prog albums that I may have never heard of or experienced before. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope you guys have an excellent day. Bye, everybody.